way connected.
From outside this world.
This is weird.
What?
Back in less than a second, right? I mean, that's just a truth.
Government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials.
Hello and welcome to UAP Check News, your demonetized, hide-free source of information on unidentified anomalous phenomena. Today, we have the very great pleasure of welcoming Dr. Robert McGwier, an expert in radio frequency and signal processing. He is adjunct professor at Virginia Tech, a former chief scientist at the Hume Center, and the founder of Hawkeye 360 and Federated Wireless. Welcome, Dr. McGwier. It's a real pleasure to have you on board today.
Oh, Baptiste, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. It's been a pleasure knowing you the last 2 years or so, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So first, so you had an illustrious career. I won't make the list right now. I invite the audience to look themselves. But in your career, what achievement are you most proud of?
That's interesting. So there are two. So in the late 1980s, I was experimenting with software-defined radio because I was into digital signal processing before Joe Mottola wrote the seminal papers that where everyone attributes him to him, the creation of software-defined radio. Now, look, Joe and I both know the situation because he and I founded Federated Wireless together. So we're actually friends. So it's not that big a deal to me. But he and I both know who came first and who did what. The paper he wrote is absolutely brilliant. So if you want to say he took a couple of interesting ideas and experiments showing how it could be done and turned it into something major, he did. So I would say the second one is I was sitting in a contract meeting on a project I was working on for a sponsor, and it's one of these unacknowledged special access programs, so I can tell you nothing about it. But in the middle of this meeting, something that was going on brought to my mind the ideas that would make Hawkeye 360 work. So they were not part of the contract. I had no obligation. So I went out and pursued venture capital funding and started Hawkeye 360 with my two friends, one former senior level person at the National Reconnaissance Office, and the other was the co-founder of the Hume Center with me. So Hawkeye 360 is now the first commercial collection of satellites to be brought into the national constellation by the National Reconnaissance Office. I mean, look, that's one of these life-changing deals. And I just had these ideas in the middle of this meeting, wrote down what I thought the math was, saw that the technology was barely existing to make it possible. And over the next 3 years, the technology got better, and now the satellites are being launched. So now Hawkeye 360 is a major component doing geospatial intelligence. So between those two things and the Hawkeye, the whole thing is based on software-defined radio. So software radio is a big deal, and the ideas behind Hawkeye, how to do RF geolocation using multiple moving payloads, multiple moving platforms, was a big deal.
Well, that's perfect because that ties exactly with my second question. What exactly is Hawkeye 360? What is the idea behind it, and in what it is really groundbreaking to have this approach? Because the first time I saw the announcement, I said, why nobody thought about that before? It's a brilliant idea, but can you explain it for the general audience that isn't specialized about the process?
Sure. So I had worked on synthetic aperture radar, and I've done RF geolocation. So the marriage of those two ideas, I said, how can I use moving platforms to improve RF geolocation? And then I said, okay, so if I do it with multiple platforms, I can form a phased array using multiple antennas. But then you have to be able to use the signals coherently. And so technology had just arrived at the moment where GPS disciplined oscillators and others like it could tame separated oscillators so that signals that were coming into each of the platforms could be added together coherently in software with no direct connection between them. So you have very long baselines between 3 different satellites. Signals come in, and using clever mathematics coupled with extremely precise timing sources allow you to add these signals coherently. And with motion and this coherent processing, there was a way to remove the modulation, and from the signal you're after, get basically a single tone and then add it up coherently. And you're adding a tone up coherently over several seconds. And you realize that what you've done is through signal processing and mathematics, you've got the equivalent using motion, Doppler, et cetera, and long-term integration, the equivalent of a massive antenna. And so the antennas on the spacecraft are tiny. So all the gain is in the mathematics and the movement. And so that allowed us to do RF geolocation on very weak signals on the ground to really high accuracy with small antennas. And so those ideas are patented, and people can go read the patents.
Mhm. So the idea is to have any type of radio frequency source can be located on Earth or even in the sky.
Yeah, any type. Doesn't even matter what the modulation is. Any type can be located. Now, if you want, so married to that, you need a lot of metadata on what kinds of things are on the ground, so you can characterize the emitter, so you can do more identification, more classification of it. So just locating, hey, there's a transmitter there, that's not really very useful. You have to marry to that, here's who we are thinking is using this transmitter, and here's why we think they are. So marrying metadata from large databases to this geolocation makes a geospatial product. And so NRO and NGA are using it.
And it's a system that is entirely passive. You don't need to paint the targets to be able to locate it.
Yeah, there's no transmitter on here except for the transmission to the ground. No, it's just totally passive.
Yeah, a brilliant invention, to be honest. So evidently, that opens the door that as any type of instruments, have you ever detected anomalies using it?
Have I detected what aliens?
Anomalies.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, so I don't control these satellites, so I don't have access to what they're doing, because almost all of their targeting that's of interest is classified. However, I have thought about using that platform, for example, under a commercial contract to geolocate the 1.6 gigahertz emitters that are happening at all these weird sites that we're seeing on television programs. So and we can locate those things to square meters with this platform. So it would be good to do that. And that has not been decided yet, but it is under discussion.
Oh, nice. That would be very interesting. How big is the...
I'm sorry, one more thing. And so just as my security clearance passed, because I decided not to continue the work, a high-ranking person assigned by NGA to Space Force approached me at the SCU conference in Huntsville last year and asked me would I be able to help them use Hawkeye to geolocate interesting anomalous signals. And and that was the moment that I met David Grush. Was during that conversation. So it was
Very
really
interesting.
So it was interesting, but I had to disappoint them and tell them, no, I can't go inside because I no longer have a security clearance. It had expired and disappeared 2 weeks before. So I know there's interest, but I can't do it for the government, but I can do it commercially if someone wants to put up the funds to do this kind of geolocation, because they can sell to anyone so long as the government doesn't get too angry. So in other words, the government would get really angry if commercial entity or they decided to start geolocating things on behalf of the North Korean government. That would make people really angry. So I mean, you got to, within reason, you can write a contract with them and get the services.
And I have two questions. The first is, what is the field of view of the apparatus? So do you need to be really precise to the area you are looking at to have accuracy in the data? Or can
No.
you monitor a very large space and pick up
Very large
everything?
spaces. And
Oh, that's
so
nice.
it's extremely large spaces. And you use the phased array and software to focus the beam. So you just collect these signals from 3 separate systems, you add them up together, assuming a location, and you scan the ground all over the earth of where you're looking. So practically speaking, it's mostly in the center of the footprint, but anywhere on the earth you can see, you can try to locate the emitter. So in other words, there's a satellite footprint from where the satellite is located in orbit. So anywhere within that footprint, you can do the math.
And is it hardware locked, or can you use other type of scientific instruments that are picking up radio frequencies to then add it to your process?
Yeah, you can, and that's done on the ground. That's what I meant by metadata. The
Okay.
metadata is just databases and or other sensors that you can add to it to aid in the identification of the emitter.
And for your point about Grush, that's very interesting because he was bashed by everyone because he only had a secondary source of information, and everybody forgot that he was in charge at the NRO, if I remember well, of working for the UAPTF and looking at radar data and geospatial intelligence for looking for UAPs. So he was in charge of.
I think, Baptiste, if people will actually listen with an open ear to what he's saying, he says he went through the Defense Department approval for his public statement. They did not give him permission to say what firsthand experience he has, so he is not allowed to talk about his firsthand experiences. But it's clear from those things he says that he is intimating he has some firsthand knowledge.
Yes. And in his last interview with Joe Rogan,
It was amazing.
that he was currently working on having authorization to talk about the first-hand information he had witnessed.
And he released new data during Rogan because he had gotten a modification. So new data was released during Rogan.
Oh, absolutely. I did not know it was linked to the, further authorization from the duty.
It was stuff he had not sent, he had not told Ross Coulthart or the House Oversight Committee. And so he added some things to the Rogan interview.
Yeah, I'm still working on that interview by taking out every sentence that he said, because there is just a wealth of information inside of it. And it's been a month out now, and we are still working on it.
Yeah, that would be great. Just let me add.
Yeah, sure.
I'm really proud to be on the editorial board of UAP Check, because I mean, it's a wonderful creation. It's needed, and with the people that are in it, it's just great. So I'm looking forward to the release of your review of the transcript.
Thank you very much. We are putting our best inside of it. So we already talked about UAPs, but what sparked your interest on that subject? Because you had a brilliant career, and it was before 2017. It was still very hard to talk about that in public. So what pushed you beyond the frontier?
Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. Inside, I heard all these rumors about rumor intelligence is pretty good in the intelligence community. So I heard all these rumors, and I've been around a long time. I had an extremely good career inside the community, and I knew a lot of people. And people would say, "Have you heard anything about this?" So my interest was piqued, and then we began to hear, I began looking into what was known on the outside. And being from the national security state, I naturally gravitated to reading and listening to Richard Dolan, who had written these books on UFOs in the national security state. And they're still, in my opinion, the best works of the eras where they covered about the nature of government and the anomalous phenomenon there that is being monitored. And in my opinion, his books show definitively that the government has had an ongoing program since before we knew what a UFO was. Okay, so so he interviewed Christopher Bledsoe for 4-hour interviews, and they was really fascinating. And the Virginia Tech was 2 hours from where Chris Bledsoe lived. So yes, that and volume 2 are well worth reading. Okay, so I contacted Chris, and I said, Chris, look, I'm a scientist over at Virginia Tech, and I see all these strange things that are happening near you. Would you mind if I came over and paid a visit? And it took him a while, but he allowed me to come over and pay a visit. And he told me basically, he kept nothing hidden. He told me every experience he'd ever had, and who had come seen him, and what government people had been by, what scientists had been by, what corporate entities had come by, and it was pretty amazing. And we got a clear night, so we went out, and during the clear night, we saw these 40-foot orbs fly right over the top of his house, right above the trees, right over my head.
40 foot?
Oh, they were 40 foot. They were
Wow.
huge and very bright. They exhibited non-ballistic motion. They hovered in place far too long to be a 40-foot drone. It was just nothing like I'd ever seen before. Then I began seeing these flashing things that looked like flash bulbs in the sky, and then this purple aura, purple mist-looking stuff right over the top of the trees. And he was looking at me and talking to me, and I was looking up, looking at this stuff, and it disappeared, like it turned off, like somebody flipped a switch. And Chris said to me, "Okay, Bob, they're gone. We can go inside now." He didn't see it disappear. He felt it disappear. So this is kind of does upheaval to the mind of a scientist to be exposed to this. And following this, I went home and I began having anomalous experiences. I saw orbs, I saw craft, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead. COVID hit, and I couldn't teach classes. I couldn't meet with my graduate students. I was all alone in this massive building. So I decided to retire. And as I was going to retire and move to my retirement home, I had a full-blown health check just to make sure everything was okay with my then doctor before I left town. And my cardiologist told me, "What have you been doing?" And I says, "What do you mean?" He said, he says, your EEG, your EKG is back to normal. He says, "It's like you did not have the heart attacks and the bypass you had." He says, "I can detect no loss of function and no deviation from the EKGs you had before you had a heart attack." He says, "To me, you've been miraculously healed."
Yeah, that's not.
And that's a constant story that goes around about people who have visited Chris Bledsoe, is if they go there and they're ill, they're healed sometimes. And it happened. So then I just decided I was going to start doing stuff. So I founded Sky Hub, which morphed into Sky 360 and is ongoing.
Yeah.
I came up with the initial architecture plan, and others did
I did
almost
not
all
know
of the
that.
work. So the initial architecture was mine, but now Richard is running this thing from inside of Europe, and they're doing great work. And
Yeah.
I have the box out here, and I'm getting ready to use it with my cameras.
Yeah, and he's an amazing friend, a really nice person.
He's a very good man.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I did not expect that depth in answer. So that's very interesting because for the first interview of UAP Check International, we received Ronnie Vernet, who is a Brazilian engineer. And in Brazil and in Southern America, to be honest, the contacts are much more hostile between human populations, both native and immigrated, and these phenomena, because there are several different ones active at the same time. Have you ever wondered what is happening to have such difference of behavior from the phenomena? Because
Okay.
the balls of light you describe are described by the native population in the middle of the jungle of Amazonia, and they are burning the population alive.
I do not know. So I can tell you that just people like Jacques Vallée and others who have spent time there and talking to them, and we know that one of our favorite UFO people is now putting together a documentary. So I think we might hear more. But some of the accusations are that the American government is involved in somehow in this, but I don't know this from firsthand knowledge, and I hate to pass on what other people think with me having no evidence, but I do not understand why things are so different there. That's not the only place, though.
No.
People who have worked out at Skinwalker Ranch under the Defense Intelligence Agency contract or a OSAP or ATIP, they have been harmed by things that are out there. And I'll give you an example. You can go look at the episodes of Skinwalker Ranch where Travis Taylor went out there and he got a radiation burn on his cheek. So, I mean, so there are some things here, but nothing like what we're hearing where villages are being half wiped out in the Amazon. I just don't know what's going on. I wish I did, but I don't.
And in Africa too, we just received Jan Alexander, who is working on cases in Africa. And it's very strange because the more the area is desolated and with little population, the more the phenomenon seems hostile to it and really we have historical examples of villages being crushed and people dead inside their houses. So very strange situation on this phenomena, and I think that's the real problem with this phenomena, because we can consider von Neumann probes coming from other civilization and exploring, and we encounter machines, and so communication is hard. There is no problem conceptually regarding that. But that type of interaction that can be, as you said, miraculous on one side and extremely hostile on the other, that is for me the enigma of that situation.
So as a former member of the intelligence community, let me wear my intelligence hat.
Feel free.
The United States and Russia have thousands of nuclear weapons, and it's clear that whatever the entities are, given the places that are visited most, they're awfully interested in our use of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. So let's suppose that they have a long-term plan to do something about this. So the first thing they might do is go where there are no nuclear weapons, there's a weak military, and see how easily they could wipe out a population if it came to that. And I don't want to think that, but if I were going to plan an attack and I wanted reconnaissance in force to see what I could do, this is what I would do. I would order go over here, they're weak, see what you can do to harm humans. Don't attack these people because they have big weapons and they might harm us before you
That's a
decide
very
to
good
go.
point.
So I'm just thinking, as an intelligence officer that has worked with military, that is a horrible way to interpret this. And I hope I'm wrong.
And I think that's an important point to make because, of course, because you have that background, I will have comments about we are spooks here to frighten the population. And I am a teacher in defense class, so I understand what are threats posed by other humans, just humans, to Western civilizations compared to the dictatorship we have in the rest of the world. People need to realize that democracies aren't the majority of the population on Earth. And can you explain the level of threat that is currently ongoing in the world? Because I don't think people realize how tough the world really is.
They don't. They don't. They don't. So, being given my history, I really have paid quite a bit of attention. And the Western liberal democracies have allowed themselves to become somewhat complacent. And so when dictators rose to power, wiped out all their opposition, and began acting in hostile fashion, it's been a long time since World War II. So I'll give you an example. I think everyone of maybe my intellectual class and my upbringing celebrated when Obama was elected president, because finally we were beginning to live down the horrors of the Civil War and slavery, and we had elected a man of African descent to be president of the United States. Okay. On the other hand, presented with clear evidence that Vladimir Putin had made up his mind to really begin acting in an ugly fashion, taking over lands in Moldova, taking over lands in eastern Ukraine, attacking Georgia, threatening all of its neighbors. He acted in a fashion that was not consistent with stopping Putin. He kept trying to normalize Putin and tried to talk him down. Then he tried sanctions, and the sanctions were weak. They were very weak. So it's only been in the last few years where finally we had enough, where he attacked the entire nation of Ukraine with the intention of rolling over it, believing we would act the way we had before. So suddenly we're awakened. Now, what do I think is going on all elsewhere? Well, China, in my opinion, is in very great trouble because of the collapse of its population. Most people don't understand what a huge demographic collapse is happening in China. Let me give you the magnitude. It's the single largest demographic collapse in the history of humanity is going on right now. And it's been going on for 15 years. And it's right now in total free fall. And the situation is they cannot recover. Okay, so the kind of mercantile class that was introduced to China by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger brought all these people from all the farms into cities, and they went from having large families to having one child or none. Okay, so their population is collapsing, and other places now supply the inexpensive labor, and the United States is tired of how ugly they act, taking intellectual property from us and our allies. So China has now installed a Putin-style dictator, a North Korean-style dictator. He has murdered all of his opposition. So just all of these forces all over the world don't believe in Western liberal democracy, and they're putting back these strongman dictatorships, and they threaten us. Now, Russia, of course, is helping Iran convince them to attack Israel to try to distract us. And it's just, we live in perilous times, and we're going to have to take defensive action and get in their way. Otherwise, they win.
Absolutely, absolutely. And people need to realize that we are a threat by our own existence. We are a model that exists, and because we exist, we are a competition to them, because we have a possibility that they lose power due to their own population.
Yeah.
And that's their threat. That's why they fear us. That's why they want to demonstrate that we are failing. If you take the newspapers in Russia for the last 30 years, they say that we are in ruins due to our liberalness and losing moral grounds due to that. And we are really an ideological threat to their hold on power. And I don't think
let
the
me
population
add
realizes
that
it.
Russia also has a major demographic problem. The Russians are not having children, just like the Chinese stopped having children, but the Tatars are having children, and so are many of the others. And soon the Russian actual people of Russian heritage, Russian blood, they will be in the minority in their own country, and they are very threatened by it. And they have oppressed all these people for decades and decades and hundreds of years in some cases, and they fear them. They fear their own people. So it's just we are living in a tough time, and I just keep hoping we get through it without a nuclear war.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people are only interested in one subject. They are fascinated by UAP. They just want to hear about UAP, but you can't disconnect it from all the other subjects.
Right.
If we didn't have that level of threat, it would be much easier to talk about UAPs to governments and heads of state. But people need to realize that once you understand the level of aggressiveness right now on international exchanges, UAPs are very low on the priority of problems. And we can almost hypothesize that they are willingly appearing as a very low threat to not attract attention on them.
I couldn't agree more. So if I wanted to do reconnaissance, I would keep a low profile and appear non-threatening until I decided it was time for me to do something. And so we cannot rule this out. No matter what people say, you can't rule this out. So with what we know now, we can't rule it out. Okay. People do not understand the level of genocide that is going on in Africa. The genocide in Africa is worse than Russia, Ukraine, Israel, etc. combined. I mean, the level of killing in Africa right now is just, we live in tough times.
Yeah.
And the disparity between wealthy Western liberal democracies and these other countries we're talking about is so great that it's just going to lead to problems. We need to come to some solution where we, without harming our own population, we figure out how to settle all this stuff down. And it's going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with you. I think people need to hear that even if they don't like it. I think it's really important to understand that level of interactions between civilizations right now. During your studies or your looking into archives, have you ever encountered the recording of radio frequency signal emitted by a UAP?
I have. It's in private hands, but Leonard Stringfield and has some in his collection, and others have. They're in private hands right now. They're not really widely available, but you can go look at multiple monographs that happened mostly around the end of World War II through the early 1960s. People were writing, like Gordon Lohr for example, wrote a monograph, was very well known amongst ufologists who've studied for a while, and he lists several frequencies in there where RF emissions are happening. And now we're seeing it at all these anomalous locations in the Skinwalker series. This 1.6 gigahertz is a common feature. If they stir the hornet's nest, this signal turns on. And I don't know what that is, but it's interesting. As a communications person, the first thing I noticed was this large signal came on, and it was amplitude modulated, like an old AM radio station, with the voices of the people who were involved in these investigations, like it was surveillance equipment that was transmitting their conversations to someplace. So I don't even know if it's UAP or whether it's the intelligence services on our planet monitoring what's going on. I don't know what it is, but it's very interesting. And so I'm beginning to look at more of these things. So I'm also interested in, let me just grab some.
You shut off your mic. No worries. In the meantime, I had a comment, a very interesting comment for that matter, regarding the 1.6 gigahertz signal. One of my audience said that it was similar to the golden ratio.
Yes.
And could be a way of communication and waiting for a secondary signal that would answer making known that we understood that it was the golden ratio.
So the other thing is, this is the Kraken SDR. This is several RTL SDRs in one box, and you can cohere them, and it can do radio direction finding. That's number one. And number two, with a different set of software, it can do passive radar. So, so you listen to large television transmitters or large FM radio stations or a large personal emitter if you're an amateur radio operator, and you're looking for reflections of objects in the sky. And you don't need to have a license to have that kind of radar because it's passive.
Yes,
it's not
absolutely.
emitting. So I'm intending to do all sorts of things with that. I got the antennas over here on the ground. I'm going to plug it in and see what I can get.
Yeah, perfect.
So RF has got to be a big deal. RF is a thing that we need to be using.
Yeah, absolutely. And people think that it's an old technology, but they don't understand how powerful that can be. So in the signals you could have access to, have you noticed some anomalies that would hint that they are not man-made or they are not useful for us?
There are signals that that I know are recorded that came from on orbit before the world had put up a satellite.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, so that I think will come out. And Tesla was one of these people.
I was about to say
and he was one of the people that is now to whom is attributed the first hearing of the quote black night from on orbit. And Tesla had records now that were not captured by John Trump. So John Trump went and collected all of Tesla's records at the end of Tesla's life and did work on them on behalf of the government. And of course, we've never seen Tesla's records.
And so inside radio frequencies, you can also reach microwave emission.
Yes.
So can you explain what effect microwave radiation can have on a human body, for example?
Oh, yeah. Well, everyone knows what a microwave does to their food. So you can heat tissue. And if you have a high enough frequency, like 10 gigahertz or so, you can easily target and heat tissues inside the brain if you have high power. So I think Havana syndrome, I thought for a long time that Havana syndrome was focused microwave energy heating some tissues inside the brain. And the effects can be subtle and have major impact on your cognition and your ability to move and other things. So I have often thought that the microwave transmissions were involved with Havana syndrome.
Mhm. And does it have a purpose for communication?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Microwaves?
The microwaves are easily used for point-to-point communications over long distances where you do not have other infrastructure.
Ah,
So in the United States, you remember the United States is, people don't understand how big the United States is.
it's
So
gigantic.
before we had fiber optics, we had large towers with microwave dishes, and they would point at each other, and that they carried long distance telephone conversations before we had the internet.
I did not know that. That's amazing. Wow. And because we have a lot of witness testimonies that are describing receiving microwave radiation, but they don't know that it is that, but we see the effects on the biology. Do you think it's a test of communication, but with a microwave emitter?
I don't know what the nature of the intent is, but they can be used for communications. They can be used for active surveillance. They can be used for radar. They can be used for all sorts of things. So it's just very interesting. I think we ought to do. I'm adding this RF stuff to my Sky 360 equipment and try to incorporate all of that into the package. So when we have visual observations, we also have RF observations, in addition to all the other ambient anomalies, the ambient things like pressure, temperature, acceleration, those kinds of things. So I just think RF ought to be a part of of where we look, because so I'll give you an example. If people claim that portals open and close, okay, or we see orbs, these orbs are emitting black body radiation. Some of it will be in the RF, and these portals, every one that I've heard of where instrumentalities have been used, electromagnetic pulses have been emitted when they open and close. And some of this pulsing occurs in the RF. And so it could be a detector based on that. And the magnetic stuff, the MADAR, that's now sponsored and used by lots of people and is kind of officially part of MUFON, that's magnetic anomalies, which can be used. So the electromagnetic spectrum from top to bottom is useful because you don't know what they're doing. That's one thing. But also, people should think now of gravitational anomalies, especially now that we have LIGO and things like it, so we can look for gravitational wave disturbances by some kinds of propulsion.
Absolutely.
It's just the future is going to be bright so long as we don't destroy our world looking for these things.
And last question about that, and it's maybe because I'm lacking knowledge in science. If I remember well, when you have electromagnetic frequencies emission, you have a wave, but you have a signal inside of it that carries the information. So you have a carrier wave, and you have the information that is superimposed to the carrier wave.
So you take your carrier wave and you multiply it times the information bearing signal. So the carrier wave moves it way up high in the spectrum and carries the information bearing signal on top of it. So that's how television works. That's how digital transmissions work. They have a carrier, they move it to the assigned channel, and on that assigned channel, they modulate that carrier with the information. So amplitude and phase changes in that carrier or constitute the information you're trying to transmit and receive.
So there is a variance in the signal we receive, and the variance is the signal and the information.
The information is the variance.
Okay. So in the signals you see, did you see that variance that could be possibly an information being carried?
Yes. And the ones out at all these anomalous places at 1.6 gigahertz, the variance, it happens to be, at least partially, the voices of the people who are doing the work at, say, Skinwalker.
Yes,
so that's
I remember that
modulation. And that is clearly, to me, a surveillance signal of some type. How it's being gathered, I don't know. But I would love to help them figure out where it's coming from.
Mhm. And yourself, because you made experiments about radio frequencies your whole career, did you ever record on one of your device a specific signal you couldn't explain, but that could be UAP maybe, but that could be meteorological phenomena, an unknown phenomena that could be obviously natural, not artificial.
Lots of them, and you get them. So I've heard whistlers at very low frequency. That happens when the sun has a burst, a flare. You hear these things called whistlers,
Wow.
and you hear these things coming from the sun. I've taken another antenna, a directive antenna, and pointed at Jupiter and heard the interaction between Jupiter and Io on my radio.
Amazing.
And the sun, I have a directive array that I haven't put up here yet, but I have it. And as the sun moves across the sky, you can see the interference fringes as it goes through the beam of the array. So you can find out things from the sun. So these are those two. The sun is black body radiation, and the Jupiter and Io are this flow of electrons and cyclotrons because of the interaction of Jupiter and Io, and that's at 21 megahertz. You can just tune in and listen to it. So yes, I've heard lots of things but there are lots of other strange things I've heard. I have no idea where they come from or how they were made.
Mm-hmm. Could Hawkeye 360 be able to locate the source?
So lots of them, yes. However, so a lot of these things. So the ionosphere allows some signals through and blocks others. Mm-hmm. So below 30 megahertz, below 20 megahertz frequency, the temperature, the noise temperature of the ionosphere blocks everything. You just can't hear radio signals much through it. But 50 megahertz and up, most of it penetrates right through the ionosphere and is easily heard from on orbit.
The trick question: can you see something coming to Earth?
The answer is yes. So let's say Hawkeye, because Hawkeye uses mostly omnidirectional antennas. So if it's Hawkeye is on the limb of the Earth, a cluster is on the limb of the Earth, and the thing is coming, say, over in the center of a place, you could have, like, say, two clusters in Hawkeye do cooperative geolocation and see it come in. And the Doppler shift and the location and these other things would enable you to plot a path.
Ah, that's amazing. I love your take.
So it'd have to be additive software because it's currently not envisioned that I know of to be used that way, because maybe there are now classified uses of it that I don't know about because I'm no longer cleared.
Yeah, it's because there was the Space Force new directives that just came out and gave a huge place of UAPs inside of it. So when I looked at the paper, I said, well, I found another use for Hawkeye 360.
I think they are using Hawkeye 360 because it has an extremely wide frequency range, and most of its aiming is software. And I think that they probably are using them because of the restricted nature of what the national technical means can do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting conversation. In the information carried by the signals you recorded, did you ever find a way to decipher it?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. And why isn't it made public?
I don't know the answer. So in some cases, there are members of estates of people who are deceased, and they've not been released by their estates. Okay, so I know who I want to talk to. I want to talk to David Marler and see if we can get him to go get the stuff.
Oh.
And put it in the museum.
I know who to talk to then.
Yeah, David Marler would be a great person to go collect this stuff.
Yes, he has an incredible reputation. He just absorbed the
Lorenzen data. He got all of the Lorenzen files. People thought they were destroyed, and he found them and acquired them.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Such an interesting conversation. What are the current developments in the scientific field in general that interest you the most currently?
So let's see. Well, it's still science because it's not quite ready to be engineering, but quantum computing is of high interest to me. So I helped start the quantum computing efforts at Virginia Tech before I retired. So that's very interesting. It's still in early stages. So the issue that we have now is let's encode something in some quantum objects. They decay too quickly to do a lot of things. So they're quote noisy. Now there are things you can do with these noisy qubits, these quantum objects, but they're limited. So there are mathematical known structures that if we can put quantum objects in these known mathematical structures, and they're called topological qubits, then they are immune enough to noise to be useful. So then all of your banking encryption will be gone because I can break your banking encrypted work in a minute once that happens. So things like that will happen. But of course, the things that interest me most are artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., being enabled and trained by quantum computing. Because once you can encode a problem on a set of data structures that are large, I can try all things that data structure can hold in very quick time, so that I can do a search over a large space in very quick time using superposition of my problem over all those particles, and then allowing some quantum logic to have it drive it in a particular direction. And then look, as soon as I look, the wave function collapses and I get to look at the remaining state, and that hopefully is the answer. Okay, so that is going to be
That's amazing.
we're going to find materials. Material science will be changed forever once the materials can be simulated on a quantum computer. The stuff it's going to be miraculous. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be miraculously enabled by quantum computing. So artificial intelligence is a thing I'm interested in. My computer here that we're using right now is a machine learning supercomputer, and I just happen to use it for this thing. But it has a big, huge GPUs in it that I do model training on and model application. So artificial intelligence and quantum computing are my interest, but my overarching interest, one that I spend almost all my time reading about, is consciousness. I'd love to understand the relationship of consciousness to other branches of science like physics, for example.
Human consciousness?
There are large and growing number of cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, philosophers, physicists, etc., who no longer believe that our consciousness is contained in our brains, that our brain is a transducer between a receiver and a transmitter between our consciousness and the physical body we inhabit. Mm. So I have a lot of interest in it. I'm just doing tons of study to try to find a tractable problem that I can tackle. So that's what's keeping me awake at night, thinking about consciousness and how to do something scientifically with it.
So I can't talk about it publicly, but I will link you to a scientist who is working on a scientific protocol specifically to test that very specific point.
Good.
I didn't expect that answer. That was very cool. There is something regarding consciousness that is puzzling me about UAPs. You explained that after your observation, you had hitchhiker effect at your home, and I always wondered, was the phenomenon always there, but your brain understood that there was something else to the world and then allowed you to see it? or it was really a contamination from the geographical point you were to the geographical point you've been?
I don't know the answer, but it seems more like the latter, in the sense that once I had been exposed to it and my consciousness was absolutely aware of its reality, so that my internal biases no longer allowed me to exclude it as a possibility, I was open to it.
Mhm.
And then you begin looking and observing, and all of a sudden you begin to see stuff because you're looking and observing that maybe you would have ignored before. So that and other anomalous experiences I've had it's just impossible for me to exclude that anymore. So, and I saw with my own eyes and standing next to him what I consider to be non-local consciousness interaction between Christopher Bledsoe and the phenomenon.
Mhm.
When the thing I was watching disappeared, he knew instantly it was gone. And it was like he had a telepathic interaction with it. So that to me has convinced me that consciousness is non-local.
I'm not sure about the specific terms, but I know, for example, ants have specific cells that are able to detect magnetic fields and to precisely locate themselves on Earth using that type of, I don't want to say mistake, so that type of cells. Um, do you think that there could be a genetic variant in human beings that could explain why some are more attuned to the phenomena than others?
Gary Nolan has done specific research, I believe in concert with our well-known CIA scientist, Kip Green, that enabled him through use of modern scanning technology to determine structures that are present in the brains of people that are highly sensitive to this kind of weird phenomenon, the psi abilities, so forth. And there are two bodies inside the brain, deep in the brain, called the caudate and the putamen. And Gary discovered that amongst a lot of these people that have these kind of experiences, they have an immensely enhanced network of interconnections between the caudate body and the putamen body, as opposed to others. Now, I also believe, given what we know about how humans learn, that if we work on training our brains, that there's sufficient neuroplasticity in our brains that we could enhance our abilities. So neuroplasticity is a thing, but I also think there are people who are naturally gifted with these extra structures in their brain that will enable them to have these kinds of abilities more easily than others.
Mhm. There is currently a very discrete but existing scientific race between various groups to prove definitely that UAPs exist. Which group, in your opinion, has the best chance of success?
Oh, that's really interesting. So I'm an associate member of SCU. They're doing a really good job of working on scientific papers, but I believe that they are entirely too burdened by hardware and physics desires to kind of figure out exactly what's going on with the phenomenon. The science and engineering being done right now, I'm gonna upset some people, I think. The science and engineering being done right now by the people on the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, they are making breakthroughs, absolute breakthroughs. And they don't have any explanations yet, but they're getting the first interesting data I've seen in a long time in this field. Now, the government, I think, probably knows everything they're finding out there, but they're not telling us because of the secrecy and overclassification of basic science. I'm adamantly opposed to classification of basic science. Engineering applications to intelligence and defense needs, hey, that can be classified, but basic science should not be classified. Okay, so I believe, I don't know the long-term plans for the SOL Foundation, but I believe that they can have a big impact if they begin to sponsor research. The Galileo project, if it goes in all the right directions, has a lot of really interesting scientists working at a very high level who could have an impact with their observatories. So there are multiple. I just can't pick a winner right now.
Yeah.
But if I were going to go out and look at somebody's data, I would go look at the Skinwalker Ranch stuff to see what I could figure out.
I agree. And I have to say, so from my own sources, they are all very confident that what is being shown in the Skinwalker is a proper reflection of the events. But the way it is shown, specifically for Europeans, it's really, really close to reality TV. So it really impedes the interest of scientists here regarding the show. And I don't have a proper solution because I listened and translated what Fugol said. I understand why he did that, and it's perfectly logic to try to cut even in the cost of research. There is no problem with that. But I wonder, didn't that type of information presentation cancel out the interest of the data?
So if you believe the statements of Fugel and Eric Bard and Travis Taylor, the History Channel has zero input to what's going on. So in other words, a couple of bucks are thrown their way, but I know for a fact, given that I've been told, that Brandon Fugel spent a lot more money than he's made from that show. A lot more money. So I believe that they internally decide what they're going to do. They welcome the History Channel to make a television out of it and edit it with some editorial input by the scientific team. But they don't get to tell the scientists and the engineers what to do.
Yeah, and we've been translating each and commenting each discovery and almost creating scientific cuts of the episode by taking only the experiments and stitching them next together. And what I see, and I'm accustomed to reading white papers and peer-reviewed journals.
Yeah,
I see nothing I don't see a manipulation in the data that I can witness, because it would be very easy to create just a hint of alien ship in the data by editing a specific part out or adding a bit of color on one point. And I don't see that in what they show. So that's why we are still covering it as a proper experiment on field. And field experiment is a field in itself inside science. Most people only see the published part. They don't see the nightmare it is to do work in the field when you collect data.
I contend that they are doing observational science. They don't yet have a theory. They're trying to figure out which experiments will elucidate sufficient features that they can wrap some kind of theory around it. I think this is early days. This is like Galileo looking through his first telescope at Jupiter and trying to figure out, is that a little planetary system around Jupiter? Which he did figure out, by the way. He saw craters on the moon. So they're literally doing, with really fancy telescopes, the kind of thing that Galileo is doing, which is gather some data and see where it leads them.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. So my last question, and it's a tough one. I've looked for it for a very long time. There seems to be an attraction of UAP to the handling and creation of new nuclear weapons, as well as new types of radar. Do you have any insights into why this might be the case?
Well, look, if people think the government did not know what was going on at Maelstrom Air Force Base, etc., they're wrong, because we modified our nuclear weapons so that those kinds of attacks couldn't happen anymore. So if I were an entity and I want to know what's going on, and I see that we are improving the physical security and the cyber security and et cetera of these nuclear weapons, I would want to monitor it so that they can continue to look at how they might interact with these nuclear weapons if they were going to be used. And a constant refrain amongst experiencers is that these things are interested in stopping us from blowing up our planet. And so that if I were them and that were true, I would be doing reconnaissance on the latest nuclear weapons and their delivery systems to see how I could stop them if it was their intent to prevent us from using them. So I see this as reconnaissance to try to stop our using them.
And the subsequent question of that part is that what surprised me was the interest for radars. So, because I can understand why you monitor nuclear weapons, I can understand why you monitor radar stations, but there is a subset of cases, specifically crash cases, that happens when a new type of radar is installed.
Yes. So apparently Roswell have happened and is blamed on a new massively powerful radar at White Sands that happened in the 40s in New Mexico. And so if I were the entities, I'd want to know what other goofy stuff we're going to be putting up in the RF spectrum that might foul up my equipment and cause me to crash. So, but according to these leaks, crashes are still happening.
Yeah. But I mean, more because that's a field I really, it's outside my field. Can a radar disturb the navigation system of a craft?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
So look, we have an entire branch of military science that's disturbing other people's stuff. It's called electronic warfare.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are conducting electronic warfare surveillance against us.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no intimation that it's for hostile purposes or maybe for defensive purposes, et cetera. And we don't know where they are coming from. All we know is they're in our sky. They might live on the same planet as us. I mean, for all I know, the aliens of Abyss, the movie Abyss by James Cameron, are in our oceans.
Yeah. And the level of secrecy of data recorded in the oceans is just astonishing. I mean, I can find some satellite data that is open access. I can find some recording of radio frequencies, but recording from the ocean, there is nothing at all.
The United States Navy is absolutely paranoid about any of its data of what it's collected underwater on its vessels and sensor systems. They just won't talk about it.
As an open conclusion of the interview, do you think there is a field in science, all science, that should be very interested in UAPs, but really don't care about the topic, and we could benefit from using their research?
Yeah, look, we need to have open data. Science needs data to do any work. So if the government had data that allow scientists to do basic science, we might have interesting outcomes. So physics and mathematics and observational instrumentation of all types that would allow us to elucidate how these things operate would be very interesting. So this is the usual stuff, I think, if what you're trying to do is figure out how they work. Mm-hmm. Now, we need cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, et cetera, to figure out what is going on with the way they communicate with people. And all these experiencers that you hear these experiencer stories, and they are all consistent. When they get on the craft, they control them with telepathy. And some of them are asked to try to fly them by what telepathic means. I mean, it's just, is that true? If so, then this non-local consciousness and telepathy and how it works and how it interacts physically with physical craft, that's a thing, which is one of the reasons the interaction of consciousness and physics is of a high interest to me.
Absolutely. Dr. McGwier, thank you so much for this interview. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't an interview at all. It was a talk between you and me, and I really appreciated your time. Thank you very much.
I appreciate the relationship you and I have, Baptiste, and I thank you for doing the interview. It was very interesting.
Goodbye, and you're welcome here anytime you want.